The lawyer called me 3 weeks after my divorce was finished. I almost didn't answer. My phone had been ringing all morning while I stacked books at the small library where I worked. Most calls were from people asking about late fees or story hours. When I saw an unknown number, I thought it was another sales call. I nearly let it go to voicemail. Then something made me stop. "Hello?" I said quietly. A calm man answered. "Is this Ms. Naomi Fletcher?" "Yes. My name is Victor Hale. I'm an attorney. I need to speak with you about your former husband, Grant Fletcher." The sound of Grant's name made my stomach tighten. Even after the divorce papers were signed, hearing his name felt like touching a bruise that hadn't healed yet. "What about him?" I asked. There was a short pause. "I believe there are matters you were never told during your marriage." I frowned. "I don't understand. I would prefer to explain in person. Can you meet me tomorrow afternoon?" My first thought was that Grant was in trouble. My second thought was that I wanted nothing to do with it. The divorce had taken almost a year. We had argued about money, about trust, about the future. In the end, Grant said we had simply grown apart. I signed the papers because I was too tired to keep fighting. Welcome to a new video. I hope you'll enjoy the story. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks. Now let's get back to the story. Mr. Hale, I said, if this is about the divorce settlement, my lawyer already handled everything. This is not about the settlement, he replied. It is about information that was hidden from you. Hidden. That word stayed in my mind long after the call ended. When I got home that evening, my apartment felt especially quiet. The rain tapped against the kitchen window. I heated a bowl of soup and sat at the small table beside the plant my grandmother had given me years ago. The plant had survived every move, every hard season, and every lonely night. I watered it whenever I needed to think. As I poured the water into the pot, I remembered the last big argument Grant and I had before he moved out. "Why are there withdrawals from our account that I don't recognize?" I had asked him. He didn't look at me. "Just business expenses." "You work for a school district, Grant." "What business expenses?" He sighed like I was bothering him. "Naomi, not everything needs a full investigation." I wanted to ask more questions, but he grabbed his keys and left. 2 months later, he asked for a divorce. At the time, I believed the marriage had simply failed. People fall out of love. That happens. I told myself not to search for a bigger reason. But now a lawyer was saying something had been hidden from me. I barely slept that night. The next afternoon, I walked into a brick office building downtown. The receptionist led me to a small conference room. A gray-haired man stood when I entered. He wore a navy suit and held a thick folder under his arm. "Miss Fletcher," he said kindly. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from him and folded my hands tightly together. "Please tell me why I'm here." Victor Hale opened the folder slowly. Inside were papers, bank records, and what looked like property documents. My heart began to beat faster. "Before I continue," he said, "I need to ask you one question. During your marriage, did your husband ever tell you he inherited anything from his late uncle?" I blinked. "No. Grant's uncle died years ago. He said there was nothing left except an old truck that didn't run." The lawyer looked at me for a long moment. Then he slid the first document across the table. "Ms. Fletcher," he said softly, "your husband inherited far more than an old truck." I looked down at the paper. At the top, in bold letters, was a number so large that for a second I thought I had read it wrong. And underneath it was Grant's signature. Signed 4 years ago. While we were still married. I lifted my eyes toward the lawyer, my hands suddenly cold. "What is this?" I whispered. Victor Hale took a slow breath. "This," he said, "is the beginning of everything your husband kept from you." I stared at the document for what felt like forever. The number at the top looked impossible. It was over $2 million. I looked up at Victor Hale and shook my head. This has to be a mistake. I wish it were, he replied gently. He turned another page toward me. These are probate records. Your former husband's uncle, Leonard Brooks, passed away 4 years ago. He left your husband a large investment account, a lake house in northern Michigan, and several pieces of land. I blinked. No. Grant told me his uncle had nothing. Victor nodded slowly. That is what he wanted you to believe. I felt like the room had become smaller. My hands rested on the table, but they were shaking. Why would he hide something like this? I whispered. I can't answer his reasons, Victor said. I can only tell you what the records show. He opened another folder. These are bank statements. I looked at them carefully. Every month, thousands of dollars had moved into an account I had never seen before. The dates caught my attention. Some of them were from the same months when Grant had told me we couldn't afford to fix our leaking roof. I remembered standing in the kitchen while rainwater dripped into a bucket. We'll have to wait, Grant had said. Money is too tight. So I worked extra hours at the library. I skipped buying new clothes. I stopped taking small trips to visit my parents because I wanted to save money. All that time. He already had more money than either of us could spend in a lifetime. A painful memory came rushing back. 3 years earlier, my mother had needed surgery that insurance didn't fully cover. I had cried while looking at the hospital bill. I wish we could help her, I had told Grant. He wrapped his arm around me and sighed. I wish we could too. But we only have enough to take care of ourselves. I believed him. My mother had borrowed money from relatives instead. She spent years paying everyone back. Now I realized Grant had been lying even then. I covered my mouth to stop myself from crying. Victor quietly handed me a box of tissues. You're not the first person I've seen go through something like this, he said. I wiped my eyes. How did you even find me? He folded his hands together. Because Leonard Brooks expected this might happen. I looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? When Leonard updated his estate plan a few months before he passed away, he left written instructions. Victor reached into the folder again. There was a sealed letter addressed to me. It said that if he ever learned Grant had hidden the inheritance from his wife, I was to contact her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, his uncle knew? He was worried, Victor answered. Grant had always struggled with honesty where money was concerned. I leaned back in my chair. Nothing made sense anymore. The man I had married always acted careful with money. He counted every dollar. He complained whenever I bought a birthday gift for a friend. He even argued with me over buying fresh flowers for our anniversary. They die in a week, he would say. Why waste money? But behind my back, he had been living with a secret worth millions. Victor slid another paper across the table. This is why I truly needed to meet you. It wasn't another bank statement. It was a copy of Leonard Brooks' final letter. Across the top, written in neat handwriting, were the words. For Naomi, if you ever learn the truth. My heart skipped. You can read it, Victor said. Take your time. I unfolded the letter carefully. The paper was old, but the writing was clear. Dear Naomi. If you're reading this, then my greatest fear has come true. I only met you a handful of times, but I always saw kindness in you. You reminded me of my late wife. That's why I'm writing this. I left everything to Grant because I hoped responsibility would make him a better man. But if he chose greed instead of honesty, then you deserve to know the truth. My eyes filled with tears again. The next sentence made me stop breathing. There is something Grant never knew. I looked up at Victor. What does that mean? Victor gave a small, thoughtful smile. I've never read the rest of the letter. You haven't? He shook his head. Leonard instructed me to give it to you unopened if this day ever came. What comes next is for your eyes only. I slowly lowered my gaze back to the letter. My fingers trembled as I turned the page. I had come to this office thinking I might learn about one hidden bank account. Instead, I was beginning to understand that Grant hadn't just hidden money. He had hidden an entire life. And whatever Leonard had written on the next page was about to change everything I thought I knew about my marriage. My hands were shaking so much that I had to place the letter on the table before I could keep reading. The room was silent except for the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. Victor Hales sat quietly across from me, giving me all the time I needed. I took a deep breath and looked back at the page. Naomi, if Grant has hidden this inheritance from you, then there is something else you deserve to know. Years before he met you, he borrowed a large amount of money from me. I never asked him to pay it back because I wanted him to build a good life. But I warned him that money should never become more important than family. I paused. That didn't sound like the Grant I had married. He always talked about earning everything himself. He often said he hated asking anyone for help. But according to this letter, his uncle had helped him long before we met. I continued reading. When I became sick, Grant visited me only a few times. During our last conversation, I told him that if he ever received my estate, he should use part of it to make life easier for the people who stood beside him. A tear rolled down my cheek. The next line hurt even more. The first person I hoped he would protect was you. I closed my eyes. For years, I had believed Grant and I were building our future together. We lived in a small house with an old roof that leaked every spring. We drove a used car that broke down twice in one winter. We counted every dollar before buying groceries. I had never complained. I thought we were simply working hard like many young couples. Now every memory feels different. Victor finally spoke. Would you like some water? I nodded. He poured a glass from a pitcher sitting on the corner of the table. After taking a sip, I looked back at the letter. There were only a few paragraphs left. If Grant made the right choices, you will never see this letter, and I will be happy knowing I judged him too harshly. But if you are reading it now, then my fears were correct. I cannot change what he has done. However, I can leave behind one final piece of advice. Do not spend your life asking why someone lied to you. Spend it finding people who no longer need to lie. I read those words twice. They were simple. But they felt heavier than everything else in the letter. At the bottom was Leonard Brooks' signature. Nothing more. No hidden map. No secret code. Just advice from a man who had seen too much. I carefully folded the letter. I don't even know what to think, I whispered. Victor nodded with understanding. Most people imagine that discovering hidden money would make them feel excited. It doesn't. No, he agreed. Usually it brings sadness first. I stared out the window. Cars passed slowly outside. People walked by carrying coffee, talking, and laughing. None of them knew that my whole marriage had just changed inside my mind. I have a question, I finally said. Victor reached for another folder. I thought you might. Why are you showing me this now? The inheritance happened 4 years ago. He took a slow breath. Because until last week, I believed you already knew. What changed? A document arrived in my office. He handed me a thin envelope. The return address belonged to an accounting company. Inside was a short letter. It explained that Grant had recently sold the lake house Leonard left him. The sale had closed only days earlier. Along with the paperwork, Grant signed a legal statement saying he had never been married when he received the inheritance. I read the sentence 3 times. He said he wasn't married? Victor nodded. According to public records, he absolutely was. I looked at him in disbelief. Why would he lie about something that is easy to check? Victor frowned. That question bothered me too. He opened another file. So I reviewed every document connected to Leonard's estate. He placed several pages in front of me. One page caught my attention immediately. It was an inventory of everything Leonard owned. There were the investment accounts, the lake house, the land, an old pickup truck, family photographs. Then, near the bottom, I noticed one more item. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't worth millions. In fact, beside it was a note that read, estimated value, less than $50. I almost skipped past it. Then I read the description. One locked cedar box. I looked up. What's this? Victor smiled for the first time since I had arrived. That's exactly what I hoped you would ask. Where is it? In my office vault. You have it? I do. I frowned. If it's worth almost nothing, why keep it locked away? Victor leaned forward. Because Leonard left very specific instructions. He reached into his briefcase and removed a small brass key attached to a faded blue ribbon. He wrote that the box was never to be opened unless one condition was met. I stared at the tiny key. What condition? Victor placed it gently on the table between us. The condition was this. He looked directly into my eyes. If Naomi Fletcher ever learns the truth, the box belongs to her. I couldn't take my eyes off the small brass key. It rested on the table between Victor Hale and me. The blue ribbon tied to it had faded with age, as if it had been waiting for someone for many years. I finally broke the silence. So, the box is mine? Victor nodded. If you choose to accept it. I don't understand. Why would Leonard leave it to me instead of Grant? He didn't leave it to you immediately, Victor explained. He left it with instructions. If Grant proved himself honest, the box would never belong to anyone else. But Leonard believed that if the truth was ever hidden from you, then you deserved to know everything. I gently picked up the key. It felt cool in my hand. What do you think is inside? Victor smiled politely. I've practiced law for over 30 years. I waited. And one thing I've learned is never to guess what's inside a sealed box. Despite everything that had happened, I almost laughed. It was the first small smile I had managed all day. Victor stood from his chair. If you're ready, I'll bring it. I nodded. He disappeared through another door, leaving me alone in the conference room. My mind wandered back through the years. I remembered birthdays when Grant said we couldn't afford presents. Christmas mornings with only a few small gifts. The summer vacation we canceled because he insisted we needed to save every dollar. I never blamed him. I thought we were simply doing our best. Now every sacrifice felt different. A few minutes later, Victor returned carrying a wooden box. It wasn't large. About the size of a family photo album. The cedar wood had grown darker with age, and tiny carved leaves decorated the lid. There was no fancy lock. Just a small keyhole waiting for the brass key in my hand. Victor carefully placed the box in front of me. This has remained sealed since Leonard's funeral. I ran my fingers across the smooth wood. It smelled faintly like an old bookshelf. For a moment, I didn't move. Part of me was afraid. Every document I had seen today had changed my life. What if this changed it even more? Victor noticed my hesitation. You don't have to open it today. I looked at him. But if I leave now, I'll spend every minute wondering. He nodded. I imagine you will. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. Slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside were several neatly wrapped bundles. On top rested a small envelope with my name written across it. Naomi. My throat tightened. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was another handwritten note. Dear Naomi. If you have reached this moment, then you already know Grant chose secrets instead of honesty. This box is not meant to hurt anyone. It is meant to protect the truth. I continued reading. Please do not judge everything by money. Money only shows what is already inside a person's heart. I thought about that for a moment. Leonard wasn't angry about the inheritance. He was disappointed by the choices Grant had made. Beneath the note was a small stack of photographs tied together with a red string. I untied them carefully. The first picture showed a much younger Grant. He couldn't have been older than 22. He was smiling beside Leonard on the porch of the lake house. They looked happy together. The next picture surprised me. Grant was standing with another young man. They looked almost like brothers. Who's this? I asked. Victor leaned closer. I've never seen those photographs. I turned the picture over. Written on the back were 4 words. Grant and Owen. Summer 2008. Owen? I whispered. I don't know anyone named Owen. Neither did Victor. We continued looking through the photographs. There were pictures of fishing trips, birthday dinners, family cookouts. Then one photograph made me stop. Grant was holding the same cedar box. Leonard stood beside him, smiling proudly. On the back, another handwritten note read, "The day I trusted him with our family's future." I swallowed hard. That sentence carried so much hope. Hope that had been broken. Under the photographs was a folded map of the lake property. Nothing unusual about it. Until I noticed one small red circle drawn near the edge of the land. Next to it Leonard had written only 3 words. Don't forget here. I looked at Victor. Does this mean anything to you? He slowly shook his head. No. Beneath the map rested one final envelope. Unlike the others, it wasn't addressed to me. Across the front, in large letters, it simply said, "To whoever finally opens this box." I carefully unfolded the letter. The first sentence made my heart race. There is one more secret that even Grant never discovered. I looked up at Victor. He didn't know about this? Victor answered quietly. If Leonard wrote that, then no. I turned the page. The next line was even more surprising. If you want the complete truth, do not begin with the money. Begin with the old cabin by the lake. I stared at the map again. The tiny red circles suddenly seemed much more important. Then I noticed something I had missed before. Written in very small letters beneath the circle were 6 simple words. The answer is beneath the stone bench. For a long moment, neither Victor Hale nor I spoke. I looked at the map again. The tiny red circle rested beside a drawing of the old lake cabin. Under it, Leonard had written the words, "The answer is beneath the stone bench." I folded the map carefully. I think Leonard wanted someone to find something. Victor nodded. That seems clear. But why didn't he simply tell me what it was? Maybe because he wanted to be certain the right person found it. I leaned back in my chair. Everything about today had been unexpected. I came to learn about hidden money. Instead, I was holding clues that felt like they belonged in an old mystery book. Still, Leonard didn't seem like someone who enjoyed games. Everything he had written had a purpose. So what happens now? I asked. Victor closed the folders one by one. That depends on you. What do you mean? The lake house officially belongs to Grant no longer. He sold it last week. My heart sank. Then it's too late. Not exactly. I looked at him hopefully. The buyer purchased the house and the land around it. However, the sale agreement says the new owners won't take possession until next Monday. Why? They're remodeling another home first. They asked for a delayed move-in. I counted the days in my head. Today was Thursday. That meant there were only 4 days left. Victor continued, legally, Grant still has access to the property until Monday morning. And the stone bench? It should still be there. A strange feeling filled my chest. I hadn't planned to visit the lake ever again. Grant and I had spent one weekend there shortly after we married. Leonard had invited us for a family picnic. I remembered the quiet water. The tall pine trees. The old wooden dock. And now I remembered something else. There was a stone bench, I whispered. Victor looked up. You remember it? Yes. It sat near the edge of the lake, facing the sunset. Leonard spent almost an hour sitting there alone before dinner. At the time I thought he simply liked the view. Now I wondered if he had been thinking about the secret beneath it. Victor smiled gently. Memory has a funny way of returning. I looked down at the cedar box. There wasn't much left inside. Only one small cloth pouch remained. I untied the string and poured the contents onto the table. Out rolled 3 old keys. Each looked different. One was silver. One was black. The last one was brass, much older than the others. Attached to the brass key was a tiny paper tag. It read, Boathouse. The property had a boathouse, I said. Victor nodded. I saw it listed in the property records. What about these other keys? He examined them carefully. I don't know. I picked up the silver key. A tiny number was stamped into it. 18. The black key had no number at all. Only a single carved letter. M. There was no note explaining either one. Leonard had left only the keys. Nothing more. I carefully placed them back into the pouch. We should go tomorrow, I said suddenly. Victor blinked. Tomorrow? If we wait, someone else might find whatever Leonard wanted hidden. Victor thought for a moment. I can arrange that. The next morning arrived with gray clouds hanging low across the sky. Victor drove while I sat quietly in the passenger seat. The farther we traveled from the city, the more trees surrounded the road. After nearly 3 hours, a wooden sign appeared beside the highway. Brooks Lake. My stomach tightened. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The road curved past familiar pine trees until the lake came into view. The water shimmered beneath the cloudy sky. Finally, we reached the cabin. It looked empty. A real estate sign stood near the driveway. The front porch had been swept clean. Everything was peaceful. Almost too peaceful. Victor unlocked the front gate using paperwork Grant's realtor had provided. We shouldn't stay long, he said. I nodded. Neither of us went inside the cabin. Instead, we followed the narrow path toward the lake. After only a few minutes, I saw it. The stone bench. It sat exactly where I remembered, facing the quiet water. Leaves had gathered around its legs. Wildflowers grew nearby. For years it had simply looked like an ordinary place to rest. Now it felt like the center of every unanswered question. Victor handed me a small garden shovel he had brought from his car. I thought we might need this. I smiled nervously. Let's hope Leonard didn't make us dig halfway to the center of the earth. For the first time in days, Victor laughed. Together we cleared away the leaves. The ground beneath the bench was soft. I pushed the shovel into the dirt. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then, clink. The metal shovel struck something hard. Victor and I froze. It wasn't a rock. It sounded like metal. Carefully, I brushed away the dirt with my hands. Little by little, the top of a small rusted steel box appeared beneath the earth. Someone had buried it there long ago. And judging by the thick layer of dirt covering it, no one had touched it since Leonard had hidden it himself. My heart pounded as Victor and I knelt beside the stone bench. The rusty steel box was only about the size of a lunchbox, but it looked very old. The corners were covered in dirt, and tiny roots had grown around it over the years. Together, we loosened the soil until the box came free. Victor brushed the dirt away with his hand. It doesn't have a lock, he said. Instead, there was a simple metal latch. I hesitated. After everything I had learned over the last 2 days, I almost expected another surprise waiting inside. "You should open it," Victor said quietly. I nodded. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the latch. The lid creaked as it opened. Inside, there were no piles of money. No gold. No expensive jewelry. Instead, everything was neatly wrapped in oilcloth to keep it dry. On top rested another envelope. This one was addressed to only one person. For the honest one. I looked at Victor. I think Leonard really believed someone would find this one day. He certainly planned carefully, Victor replied. I opened the envelope. Inside was a short letter. If you are reading this, then you cared enough to search for the truth instead of taking the easiest path. That tells me more about your heart than any amount of money ever could. I smiled sadly. Leonard always seemed to care more about people than possessions. Beneath the letter was a small leather notebook. Its cover was worn from years of use. When I opened it, I realized it was Leonard's personal journal. Most pages contained simple notes about fishing trips, weather, family dinners, and repairs around the lake house. Then I reached a page that had been marked with a folded ribbon. The date caught my eye. It was written only a few weeks before Leonard passed away. I began reading aloud. Today I spoke with Grant again. I asked him to promise that he would always tell Naomi the truth. He smiled and said he would. I swallowed hard. The next entry came 3 days later. I visited the bank this morning. I noticed Grant has already begun moving money into accounts that Naomi does not know about. I fear he believes wealth should be hidden instead of shared. Victor quietly shook his head. So Leonard knew. He suspected enough to write it down, I answered. I turned to another page. This entry was much shorter. If Grant continues down this road, he will lose something far more valuable than money. I closed the journal for a moment. He lost his marriage, I whispered. Victor didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew it was true. Under the journal sat a small wooden picture frame. The photograph inside showed Leonard standing beside his late wife. Both of them were smiling at the camera. Written beneath the picture were simple words. The richest people are the ones who are trusted. I carefully placed the frame back inside the box. There was one final item remaining. A large sealed envelope. Across the front, Leonard had written, "Legal documents." Victor immediately became serious. "May I examine those?" "Of course." I handed him the envelope. He opened it carefully and removed several folded papers. His eyes moved across the pages. Then he stopped. His eyebrows rose. He read the same paragraph again. "What is it?" I asked. Victor looked almost stunned. "This changes several things." My stomach tightened. "Good or bad?" "I'm not sure yet." He handed me the first page. At the top was the title. Declaration of Intent. Below it was Leonard's signature. I began reading. Although my estate legally belongs to my nephew, I strongly request that the inheritance remains shared property within any marriage he enters. It was never my wish that my gift be used to deceive a husband or wife. I looked up. Is that legally binding? Victor slowly shook his head. No. My shoulders dropped. But I waited. It proves Leonard's intentions beyond any doubt. He continued reading through the remaining pages. One document listed every asset Leonard had owned. Another described conversations he had with his financial advisor. Then Victor stopped again. He stared silently at the final page. What now? I asked. Without speaking, he turned the paper toward me. At the bottom was a signed statement from Leonard's longtime accountant. It explained that shortly after receiving the inheritance, Grant had requested advice about how to keep certain assets hidden during his marriage. I felt my chest tighten. He planned this. I whispered. It appears he did. I looked out across the peaceful lake. The water was calm. Birds flew overhead. Everything around us looked beautiful. Yet sitting in my hands was proof that my marriage hadn't fallen apart because we slowly grew apart. It had been built on a secret from almost the very beginning. As I carefully placed the papers back into the steel box, I noticed one last folded slip of paper tucked beneath the envelope. It was so small I had almost missed it. I unfolded it. There were only 7 handwritten words. Ask Owen why Grant feared the old lighthouse. I stared at the note. Then I remembered the photographs from the cedar box. The young man standing beside Grant. The one whose name I had never heard before. Owen. For the second time in 2 days, I realized the biggest secret still hadn't been uncovered. I read the note again. Ask Owen why Grant feared the old lighthouse. The words were short, but they raised 100 questions. I carefully slipped the note into my pocket. Victor locked the steel box and placed it in the trunk of his car for safekeeping. We agreed to keep everything together until we understood what Leonard had been trying to tell us. As we drove away from the lake, I couldn't stop thinking about the photograph from the cedar box. Grant and Owen. Smiling like close friends. Yet during my entire marriage, Grant had never once mentioned anyone named Owen. Do you know how to find him? I asked. Victor nodded. I hoped you would ask. He reached into his briefcase while keeping his eyes on the road. When I reviewed Leonard's files, I found an old emergency contact list. He handed me a folded sheet. There were several names. Near the bottom was one that caught my attention. Owen Mercer. Beside it was a phone number and an address in a small town only 40 minutes away. We're close, Victor said. If he's still there. I looked out the window. Maybe today would finally answer all the questions. Or maybe it would bring even more. An hour later, we pulled into a quiet neighborhood filled with neat little homes. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. Someone was mowing a lawn. Everything felt peaceful. Victor parked in front of a white house with blue shutters. This is the address. I suddenly felt nervous. What if he doesn't want to talk? Then we'll respect that. I nodded. We walked to the front door. Before I could knock, it opened. A man in his early 40s stood there holding a watering can. His brown hair had begun turning gray around the edges. He looked at us with polite curiosity. Can I help you? Victor introduced himself first. My name is Victor Hale. This is Naomi Fletcher. The moment Owen heard my last name, his expression changed. Fletcher? I nodded. I was married to Grant. Owen became very quiet. Finally, he stepped aside. You'd better come in. His living room was simple but warm. Family photographs covered one wall. A golden dog slept peacefully near the fireplace. Owen returned with 3 glasses of lemonade. After everyone sat down, he looked directly at me. I always wondered if this day would come. I felt my heart race. You knew me? I met you once. I frowned. I don't remember. You wouldn't. He smiled sadly. It was at Leonard's birthday picnic. You were helping in the kitchen while Grant and I argued outside. I searched my memory. I vaguely remembered hearing raised voices that afternoon, but Grant had told me they were discussing football. That wasn't true, was it? No. Owen shook his head. We argued about honesty. The room became silent. He already knew about the inheritance? I asked. Yes. And you? I knew too. I stared at him. You never told me. His shoulders lowered. I wanted to. Then why didn't you? He looked toward the family pictures on the wall before answering. Because Grant begged me not to. Those words hurt more than I expected. He said he wanted time to surprise you, Owen continued. He promised he would tell you after he organized everything. I gave a bitter little smile. He never did. No. Owen looked genuinely disappointed. A few months later I realized he wasn't planning a surprise. What changed your mind? He asked me to lie. I leaned forward. Lie about what? If you ever asked whether Leonard had left him anything, I was supposed to say the inheritance barely covered funeral costs. My stomach tightened. So everyone believed that? Owen shook his head. No. Who knew the truth? Only 4 people. He counted on his fingers. Grant. Leonard. Leonard's accountant. And me. I remembered the accountant's statement inside the steel box. Everything fit together. There was one thing I never understood, Owen said quietly. What? Grant became terrified of one place. The lighthouse? He nodded. The old lighthouse near the lake. Why? Owen took a slow breath. Because Leonard took him there 2 weeks before he died. My heart skipped. What happened? I wasn't there. Then how do you know? Grant told me. Owen looked me straight in the eyes. He said Leonard made him promise something inside that lighthouse. What promise? Owen hesitated. He never said. Nothing? He only told me one sentence. I waited. Owen's voice became almost a whisper. He said, if I ever break my promise, the lighthouse will give everything away. A chill ran through me. The lighthouse will give everything away? Owen nodded. I thought he was speaking in riddles. Victor suddenly sat forward. Naomi. I looked at him. The property map. Realization hit me at the same moment. The lighthouse stood on the same stretch of shoreline as the lake cabin. Only a short walk away. Leonard hadn't sent us to the cabin because it was the final answer. He had sent us there because it was only the beginning. And somewhere inside the old lighthouse, Grant believed there was something powerful enough to expose every secret he had ever tried to bury. The drive back to the lake felt much shorter than before. None of us talked very much. Victor kept his eyes on the road while I held Leonard's map on my lap. Every few minutes, I looked at the small drawing of the old lighthouse standing near the edge of the shoreline. I couldn't stop thinking about what Owen had said. If I ever break my promise, the lighthouse will give everything away. What could possibly be hidden inside an old lighthouse? By late afternoon, we parked near the lake again. The lighthouse stood on a small hill overlooking the water. It wasn't very tall, but it had clearly been there for many years. White paint peeled from its walls, and the windows were dusty. Wild grass surrounded the stone path leading to the door. It looks abandoned, I said. It has been for years, Victor replied. We walked up the path together. The wooden door was closed but not locked. Victor pushed gently. The hinges groaned as the door slowly opened. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and salt from the lake. Sunlight shined through the narrow windows, filling the room with long beams of light. A winding staircase circled upward to the lantern room. Everything was quiet. Almost too quiet. I looked around the first floor. There wasn't much there. An old wooden bench. A dusty table. Several shelves with faded books about the history of the lake. If Leonard wanted us to find something, I said, it has to be here somewhere. Victor nodded. We searched carefully. For nearly 20 minutes, we looked through every corner. Nothing. I checked the shelves. Victor examined the walls. Still nothing. I began to wonder if we had misunderstood Leonard's clue. Then I remembered something. The promise. Victor looked at me. What about it? Grant didn't say the lighthouse hid a secret, He said the lighthouse would give everything away. Victor slowly smiled. That's different. I looked around the room again. Not for something hidden. For something meant to reveal. My eyes landed on a framed photograph hanging near the staircase. It showed Leonard standing beside several volunteers who had restored the lighthouse years ago. Below the picture hung a small brass plaque. I stepped closer. The plaque listed every person who had helped restore the building. Most names meant nothing to me. Then I saw it. Grant Fletcher. I frowned. He helped restore this place? Victor joined me. Apparently. Something about the plaque felt strange. I gently touched one corner. It moved. Victor. He leaned closer. The plaque wasn't attached tightly. It swung outward like a tiny door. Behind it was a narrow compartment hidden inside the wall. My heart raced. Inside the compartment rested a small digital recorder. Next to it was a folded note. I unfolded the paper. Leonard's handwriting greeted me once again. Naomi. If you found this, then you followed every clue with patience instead of anger. The recorder contains my final conversation with Grant. I asked him one question. His answer will tell you everything you need to know. My hands trembled as I picked up the recorder. Victor found fresh batteries inside the compartment. They're still sealed, he said. Leonard had thought of everything. Victor placed the batteries inside. The screen lit up. There was only one recording. Its title read, Last Conversation. I pressed the play button. For a moment, there was only the sound of birds and gentle waves. Then Leonard's familiar voice spoke. Grant, I need your word. Grant answered immediately. You have it. If I leave everything to you, will you promise never to hide it from your wife? There was a pause. Then Grant replied. I promise. Leonard spoke again. Not because the law says you must. Another pause. But because love cannot grow where secrets live. Several seconds of silence followed. Then Grant answered quietly. I understand. The recording ended. That was all. No shouting. No argument. Just a promise. A promise Grant had broken. I stared at the recorder. For the first time since the lawyer called me, I didn't feel angry. I felt something else. Peace. The mystery wasn't about missing money. It wasn't about hidden land. It wasn't even about inheritance. Leonard had wanted me to discover the truth with my own eyes, so I would never again blame myself for a marriage that had failed because of someone else's choices. Victor gently closed the hidden compartment. I think Leonard wanted you to leave with certainty. I nodded slowly. I have it. As we stepped outside, the evening sun reflected across the calm lake. I looked back at the lighthouse one last time. Grant had spent years protecting a fortune. But in the end, the only thing that truly survived was the truth. The money could buy houses. It could buy land. It could even disappear. But one broken promise had cost him something far greater. It had cost him the trust of the person who loved him most. As I walked toward the car, my phone buzzed. A message appeared on the screen. It was from an unknown number. Naomi, this is Grant. We need to talk. I know you found out everything. In the end, I want to ask you something. If you were Naomi, would you have confronted Grant after discovering he had hidden a life-changing inheritance and broken the promise that held your marriage together? Or would you have walked away for good, knowing that some betrayals can never truly be repaired? And if you were Grant, at what moment would you have admitted the truth? Would you have confessed the secret from the beginning, or would you have let greed and fear destroy the trust of the person who loved you most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I always enjoy reading your opinions. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful family dramas filled with hidden secrets, betrayal, emotional justice, redemption, and unforgettable endings. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, the strongest foundation any family can have isn't wealth or success, it's honesty. Because once trust is broken, even the greatest fortune can never buy it back.